We want these little kingdom outposts to be there for God's kingdom to come and for His will to be done in this city. My name is Patrick Boyle. My wife Jessica and I serve in Hiroshima, Japan, and we're missionaries there. We've been there for about 2 years, and both of our children are there with us serving, and our goal is to plant churches, and we're on a multicultural church planting team with an organization called Pioneers. What led us to Japan was kind of an interesting chain of events. My wife and I met in Bible college, both studying missions. So independent of each other, we already had a desire for missions. So that was really nice whenever we got married because we were both moving the same direction. And after college, we moved to South Korea, and we were living in Busan, the second largest city, and we really loved it there. But during that time, we started to think about Africa because her heart was for Africa. And I said, well, the country of Mozambique has a lot of unreached peoples, and it's in Africa, so let's start praying about that. So for several years, we were looking at that nation, and I was emailing missionaries, finding out more about it, learning about the whole culture there and the needs, and we finally decided to go in 2012 just to check it out. And during our time there, we very quickly realized that this was not going to be a good fit for us. And we hadn't talked about it. We both arrived at that apart from each other, and then when we talked, we both said, I don't think this is where we need to be at. So we're actually still in Mozambique, and we're on a beach on the shore of the Indian Ocean, looking out into the ocean, and we're kind of talking, and I said to my wife, well, maybe we're just trying to shift gears too much, because we've been in this large urban center in Korea, subways, taxis, buses everywhere, skyscrapers, and we love it. We do really well there. And now we're looking at totally changing gears and moving to Africa and living in the jungle and driving on these dirt roads with potholes. And it's a totally different change and a totally different shift. And there's also a strong Islamic influence. So it's not only changing cultures, but it's changing, the mindset, and everything's just totally different. So I said, what if we turn our eyes back to Asia and turn our eyes back to urban Asia? And so I said, well, I think Japan has a lot of needs. And I didn't know a lot of details, but I started to share with her. And at first she thought that if we're really going to be true missionaries, we have to be roughing it. We have to be somewhere in a jungle or something. It took her a while to get used to the idea of living in a city and doing missions there where we have creature comforts. But we prayed about it, and we learned more about the needs of Japan and more about the great gospel need there. And over time, God really put it in both of our hearts. And so that led us to Hiroshima. Hiroshima is a large city by our standards, not in Japanese standards. The Japanese view it as a small city, but it's over 1 million people. If you consider the wider area, 1.3, 1.4 million people. So there's a huge need in Japan, and obviously it's a world famous city for obvious reasons. These 3 pastors that we work with, they've given us a lot of helpful information about the city itself. And according to them, there are 45 known churches in the city. So 1.3 million, only 45 known churches. And we know from missions studies in Japan, the average church size in Japan is 40 people. And that's actually high for most of the churches I've been in. But if you do the math and you multiply 45 times 40, that's 1,800. So you have 1,800. Now let's say that the numbers are off, and let's give an extra 200. Let's say there's several churches that we don't know about, or there's a pocket of Christians that they're unaware of. So give it an extra 200, that's 2,000 people. So a city of 1.4 million, and you have 2,000 followers of Jesus. And those numbers are just staggering. So when we go through this city, we look around, we see the lostness, we see the darkness, and we want to be there to plant churches. And so the great thing about our time in Japan is the first 2 years were hard, but we left very motivated, and we really do feel like we want to get back, we want to plant churches, we want these little kingdom outposts to be there for God's kingdom to come and for His will to be done in this city. And so we're really fortunate and thankful for God placing us in this city and with our team, and we're really looking forward to hopefully partnering with the churches that are there and starting more churches that will be able to reproduce themselves for that city. Getting acclimated was a challenge, but we kind of knew things like buying a car, things like renting a house, all of that we're going to need someone to help us because we can't do that by ourselves. So you become very dependent very quickly on people that can speak the language and they can help communicate for you. Also, 3 months after we arrived, our son was born. So we had to acclimate to a new addition to the family, as well as raising, our daughter at the same time and helping her acclimate to life there, getting her involved in school. And then my wife had some other medical issues with her gallbladder. We were talking about it this morning, and we counted up. She was in the hospital for a total of 30 days, all told, during our first 2 years. So that's all of the issues leading up to the birth of our son, and then she had to have her gallbladder taken out, and that was an emergency thing that required several days of hospitalization before that. So our team is small, and when we first got there, Jessica's in the hospital a lot, but our daughter was not yet in school. So we had the challenge of me wanting to be at the hospital with her, but having a 4-year-old that can't sit in the hospital all day long, but at the same time having a small team that it wasn't always available to babysit. So some of it wasn't even ministry related, it was just life related, and trying to figure out how do we have a baby, get medical care, live in a huge city that requires a lot of driving to get from our house to the hospital, and deal with a 4-year-old daughter. So that was just the living side of things. Other challenges are just language. Language learning will be an ongoing thing for quite a while. I can communicate in some basic ways in Japanese, but certainly not fluently, and certainly not at a level where I could share the gospel in a way that really penetrates their heart and really connects with them. So in that way, we still feel very, very young and very, very green. In terms of getting the culture and daily life there, we're growing in that regard all the time. So when we left, we were feeling fairly comfortable in terms of buying gas, paying bills, knowing which grocery stores to go to, using the ATM, all of those things that you do here without thinking about it, but there it takes a little bit of effort if you're using an ATM and the whole thing is in Japanese. So in that regard, we feel like we're still very young and we have a lot of learning to do. But I did notice that toward the end of our first 2 years there in terms of ministry, God started to stir in us some different things where we began to get some ideas and formulate some different plans for moving forward. Our goal from the beginning was always planting churches, but I went in saying, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. Let's learn the language, let's learn the culture, let's learn from these pastors before we come in and say, we need to do this, we need to plant this church, and just bring a lot of fresh ideas. I didn't feel like that was the best way to do it. So I sort of intentionally daydreamed about what God might be doing, but I wasn't pursuing specific ministry tasks. Just the big goal of planting churches was always there, but I always knew that was in the future. However, toward the end, really without me trying to focus on it, little ideas just started coming. What if we moved in this way? What if we looked at this part of the city? The Japanese churches have typically focused on this demographic of people. What if we move in this direction? So some of those things started happening, and at the same time I'm having some of those conversations with my team leader, and he's also getting some of those same things. So it was very cool to see there's a unity of vision between me and our team leader and the other members on our team. So in that regard, I feel like things are starting to amp up a little bit. And even during this period of being back in the States, I was just having breakfast with my wife this morning, and I was saying, if we plant a church here, we need to focus on this, and it looks like this is going to be an effective way. So some of those things are beginning. So that's kind of maybe a middle ground where we're still wanting to keep that humility, but we're also wanting to look to the future and see where God might be taking us. I think we saw God at work with the neighbors that we have there, because we didn't know the language right away. And of course, we want to be useful right away, though. So how do you, without being able to communicate, somehow make a difference and somehow be a positive impact on the people around you? Because you want to share Jesus, but you can't do it verbally, so what do you do? So we decided we just wanted to be very intentional with the neighbors living directly next to us and within our neighborhood itself. And we're really fortunate because there's a little park right in front of our home. And with us having 2 young kids, we were at the park all the time. And our neighborhood has tons of kids, tons of moms, tons of dads, and so that park is always in use. So we went there all the time, and we just intentionally became a normal fixture there. So eventually people got used to seeing the Americans at the park with their kids. And one day I was there with my daughter, and my wife had just had Hudson, so they were at home, and I was just getting Lily out of the house. And one of the moms came up to me, and she started speaking English to me. And I was really thrown off, not expecting that at all. It turns out that her English is great, and her husband studied in New York City when he was in college, And they're about our age, a little bit older than us. And she said, hey, I'd love to, meet your family and you can come meet mine. So I got her phone number and gave it to my wife. They began to communicate, and then we eventually met her husband. And we have a relationship ongoing with them even now. And we had a chance to eat with them and actually enter their home. And they invited us for the meal. We had a great time. And we just sort of nonchalantly mentioned this to some of our teammates. And as I mentioned, our team leader's wife is Japanese. And she said, they invited you into their home? You went inside and you had a meal? Yeah, we had a meal. Japanese people don't do that. That's not common for them to invite one another into their homes. I'm really surprised that you got to go in. And we said, yeah, we had a great time. So we invited them. They came to our home for dinner. And so we've had that going on, back and forth. And we've had a really special relationship with them. And as we're packing to get ready to come back to the States for this 6-month period, the mom knocks on our door. Hey, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you're packing. I know you're busy. You're leaving tomorrow, but me and my daughter just wanted to come, and I think they gave us some Japanese candy and said, hey, this is for you. We're thinking about you. Have a great trip. And so we've had little opportunities to share the gospel in English with them, but we're building a relationship, and it feels very natural. It doesn't feel like, here's a tract, have a good day. It feels like, you're my friend. I care about you. You're not just someone that I want to proselytize. I want to be invested in you. And so that feels like a win for us. And even since we've been back, we've been communicating with them through text messages and trying to keep that conversation going. And that just feels good to know that we're going back to friends that aren't Christians, that are very needy, but we have a real relationship with them. And they were even talking before we left, hey, there's a park about an hour away where we can go kayaking and hiking. We should do that whenever you get back. So we're building those relationships and trying to be intentional, looking for chances to share the gospel. And I feel like we have other stories like that too, where just a normal one-on-one intentional connection really went a long way. Yeah, what impact will COVID-19 have? I don't know how it will affect our ministry, but we're praying for Japan as a whole, that this would really bring about a sense of humility in the Japanese people. Because one of the challenges we face is Japan's not a poor country. Japan has a very orderly society, and most of the time, if society's running well, if the trains are on time, if everything is going well at your job, and if you're not having any stress within your family, you're probably not thinking that much about deeper spiritual issues. And so most of the time in Japan, there's just not that deeper questioning by most people. But we're praying that this reminder that we're all mortal, and this reminder that we live in very uncertain times, would cause people to look deeper. And we've heard stories about regions in Japan back in 2008 that were strongly affected by a tsunami that wiped out entire fishing villages. Christian, philanthropic, and missions agencies went in to provide aid and to provide support. And they stayed after other non-Christian organizations left. So they stayed for the long haul. And they reported a 300% increase in church planting in those areas because there was a visible demonstration of God's love and God's kingdom values, which led to something good, which led to more churches being planted. So we're praying in a similar way that COVID-19 would sort of wake people up, and that there might be an increase just in seeking or in an awareness of our weakness and our need for something greater. So I don't know how it will affect our ministry. It may affect us being able to go back to Japan like we plan to in September, but in the long run for Japan, we're hoping that it has a positive and unintended or unexpected effect. I think sometimes people might feel like it's disingenuous if a missionary says, we're grateful for financial support, but prayer is more important. They might think, oh, well, you have to say that, but of course you need money to be there. But truly for us, prayer is so important because we are so often reminded of our weakness, and we're so often reminded of our need for God's Spirit to do something, because it won't be anything that we do. And so having that sense of weakness, we love to hear when people are praying for us, because we really do believe that we in ourselves don't have anything special to offer. And so, as I mentioned earlier, some of the challenges from our first 2 years there, when people told us they were praying, it really did mean a lot, and we truly felt the power of people's prayers that were undergirding us, because there were so many times where we felt like we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do, this feels really hard, but we knew people were praying. So I would encourage Boulevard to continue to pray for us. And also there's another thing that anyone can do. We send out our monthly email newsletter, and at the bottom of that we have our mailing address in Japan. Our kids would love to get something in the mail from anyone, just a birthday card or just a picture that maybe another little child drew. They would really enjoy that. So something in the mail, something tangible, would always be a nice surprise as well.